Now available in paperback and Kindle Unlimited. Isis, Escape from Transylvania. The goddess next door and John Haynes must escape a horde of vampires on the hunt in this horror-filled Isis series adventure. Get Isis, Escape from Transylvania in paperback and Kindle Unlimited today. It's clear to me that Hollywood is completely out of ideas, because instead of them creating something new and original, they've decided to recycle old television shows into brand new ones. And CBS, in a desperate move in order to try to get ratings, has decided to reboot Magnum P.I. And they've recruited the director of The Fast and the Furious to help them make this new Magnum P.I. series, and that director has clearly missed the mark as related to this new Magnum P.I. Because his vision for Magnum P.I. does not capture the spirit of the original television show, nor does it stay true to the source material of the original show. From what I saw in the 3-minute trailer for this new Magnum P.I., I saw nothing as related to the original 1980s show. Now, as a child of the 1980s, Magnum P.I. was one of those staple shows of the 1980s as related to primetime television, because Magnum P.I. came on from 1980 to about 1988, and I remember when Magnum P.I. ended in 1988 because that was the year I started high school and I was going to Park West High School, and the show ended when I was getting ready to finish my first year at Park West, and that was the last year for Magnum P.I. And I remember the show being in syndication about that time because it was literally on Channel 9 at the time almost every night. And it had a distinct look and it had a very distinct feel. And one of the things that was very distinct to me was Tom Selleck. Now, Tom Selleck was a white dude who was supposed to be playing Tom Magnum, a white male ex-military guy, and he was doing some work for Robin Masters, who was this British guy who wrote these novels. Now, Tom Magnum was a private investigator who would go out here and he would work on these cases on the island while he was out here taking care of Robin Masters' estate, because he was a caretaker for Robin Masters' estate. And while he would do that, he would do investigations on the side. And while he was doing these investigations, he would run into all of these really attractive women on the island of Hawaii. And the original Magnum P.I. was a man's fantasy. It was a man in a paradise, and he was out here just living life the way he wanted to on his terms. And because Tom Magnum was supposed to be this manly man, and he was working for Robin Masters, the guy in the background who was doing the writing of the stories, he was the guy having all the fun and fantastic adventures while working on cases and bringing in his friends who were ex-military as well. However, when I look at this new Magnum, I don't see anything that resembles the original Magnum P.I. And one of the things that was really glaring to me was the casting. And the casting of this new Magnum, it smacks of identity politics and an attempt to force diversity, because Tom Selleck was a white male, and the new Magnum P.I. is a Latino guy. And I'm looking at that casting, and it's just completely wrong for the character. And it looks like to me that they're trying to force diversity in a place where it doesn't belong. Because, again, the original Tom Magnum was a white male. And the reason why he was a white male was because that's what the character was supposed to be. He was supposed to be this Vietnam vet, this ex-military guy, and it really factored into a lot of Tom Magnum's stories. And the casting of a Latino guy, it doesn't really fit this character, and it throws the whole show completely off. Because Magnum P.I., the original one, really dealt with a lot of issues as related to the Vietnam War, and it dealt with a lot of issues as related to what a lot of soldiers dealt with, like PTSD and other issues soldiers had to struggle with. And I don't think this casting really helps work in that particular point, because I look at that casting and it's a complete miscasting. Now, the other issue I have with this new Magnum P.I. has to do with the way he looks and the way he dresses. Now, again, when it comes down to the original Magnum PI, Tom Magnum, he was supposed to be a man's man. And he was literally living in paradise and living a man's fantasy. And the reason why he was dressed so casually was because he was living the man's fantasy. He was living on this, plush estate, and he really didn't have to do much. So he did never really dressed up. He often wore these Hawaiian shirts and these shorts, and he oftentimes just wore these sneakers, and that was just about it. He often wore his Detroit Tigers cap. That was about it for your Tom Magnum. He dressed very casually because that's how he would roll, because he was a very casual guy. But when I look at this new Magnum, he's not really dressed like the original Tom Magnum. No, he's dressed very metro, and he's got on these long sleeve shirts, and that's not Tom Magnum. Tom Magnum never really dressed up that fancy. And I look at this guy, and he's in Hawaii, and he's got on a long sleeve shirt, and he's got on these long slacks. And again, that's just not who Tom Magnum was. Tom Magnum was really laid back. He was the guy who wore the rumpled Hawaiian shirt. He was the guy who wore the Detroit Tigers cap. He was the guy who wore, sneakers with no socks. He was real casual. He was real laid back. And I'm not getting that vibe from the actor they cast. In fact, he's just very, very stiff, and that's just not who Tom Magnum was. Tom Magnum was the guy who a guy could go and sit and have a drink with, or a guy could sit and hang out with, and I'm not getting that vibe from him or any of the guys who he has cast as part of his crew, ex-military crew. I'm not really getting, that laid-back, mellow vibe that I used to get when I would watch Magnum P.I. Now, in addition to bringing back the new versions of the old Magnum P.I. cast, we get another one of these SJW diversity hires, in that they've decided to bring in this British female, and I believe that the British female has been brought in to replace Robin Masters. And I'm looking at that, and that's making me shake my head, because again, the original Robin Masters was a British dude. The original actor was actually a guy from Texas playing a British dude, but he was a British dude who was stuffy and uptight, and there was a reason why he was a stuffy and uptight guy, and there was a reason why he was the way he was, because he was supposed to be this really formal and gentlemanly type, and he was supposed to be a total contrast to Tom Magnum, and really changing the Robin Masters from a male to a female really throws off the show and the show dynamic. Now, the producers probably thought they were going to try to make this into a romance later on, but we really didn't want to see that, because there was always a great respect that Tom Magnum had for Robin Masters, and those two men usually, even though they disagreed with each other, they oftentimes respected each other at the end of the day. And I see that whole dynamic thrown off by the casting of this female in the show. And again, this smacks of identity politics and another forced attempt at diversity where there was no need for diversity, because the original Magnum P.I. had an extremely diverse cast. I mean, this show did have a black character who was featured prominently in most of the episodes, and it often featured lots and lots of exotic women all throughout the 8 seasons of Magnum P.I. So there was no need to bring in a Latino Magnum P.I. There was no need to bring in a British female to play what I think is the Robin Masters role, because there was already diversity in the original Magnum P.I. Because the original Magnum P.I. not only featured the black character who was the helicopter pilot, but it was also featured, again, lots of Latinos, lots of Asians, and lots of Hawaiians who were cast in many of the roles of the women Magnum romanced in many of the episodes of the original Magnum P.I. And that's another thing I had a real issue with this Magnum P.I. reboot, is that it tries to shoehorn diversity in a place where it doesn't need for there to be diversity. And another issue I had with this show was the really dark tone that the Fast and Furious director has really put on this new Magnum because, again, yes, there were really dark moments in the original Magnum PI as related to dealing with issues related to the Vietnam War and the issues soldiers faced in the Vietnam War, like the PTSD and many unresolved issues as related to things that many of the soldiers experienced in the Vietnam War. But in this show, I'm just seeing a really, really dark tone. And that dark tone really does not fit the show because the original Magnum PI was a very light show, again, and the reason why it was very light because it was supposed to be a man's fantasy. It was supposed to be an escape for men to go watch, where they watch a guy just like them go to this exotic place, Hawaii, to live out a paradise life where they're just sitting there enjoying life as they go and they work on this job as a private investigator and a caretaker of this property. And that's what the original Magnum PI was all about. It was all about making it a man's fantasy, and I'm not seeing anything there as related to making this a man's fantasy. What I'm seeing in this new Magnum PI is just another generic CBS cop show, just like their new Hawaii Five-0, and just like their numerous bland episodes of NCIS, a show where every episode is practically the same. And that's not what Magnum PI should be all about, because Magnum PI, when it was on, was an extremely distinct show, and it was an extremely fun show. And again, it not only gave men their fantasy in that they get to see this guy having fun in paradise while solving cases and stopping crimes, but they also, women got to see an extremely attractive guy, being the woman's ultimate fantasy, this alpha male who goes out and solves cases and has adventures and goes out here and romances women just like them. And people aren't getting that from this new Magnum PI. And that's why many people who grew up in the 80s, like myself, aren't happy about this new Magnum PI. Because as a guy who grew up in the 80s, I know what this show is all about. And one of the things that really turned me off was seeing all those wrecked Ferraris. Because on the original Magnum PI, Robin Masters always insisted that Magnum take care of that car. And Magnum, having great respect for Robin Masters, always made sure to make efforts to protect that car. He never destroyed that car or made sure that that car was damaged because he knew how much it meant to Robin Masters, and he had such great respect for that man that he didn't damage that car, because that car was something personal for guys back in the 80s, and a guy's ride was something that, it meant something to him. So you always, if you were working with somebody's car, you never made any sort of effort to damage it. So when I look at that one part of Magnum PI, that was a thing that really turned me off about it, because seeing all those cars wrecked and then seeing and knowing the original Magnum PI and knowing Tom Magnum's relationship with the original Robin Masters and how much it meant to him having that Ferrari, that was a thing that really turned me off regarding, seeing all those cars being destroyed. Because, again, the real Tom Magnum, who was played by Tom Selleck, understood what that car was and what it meant to him. And that's why he went out of his way to really try to look out for it whenever he was out doing investigations. And when I was watching this reboot, again, I did not see anything that captured any heart or soul of the original Magnum PI in that trailer. All I saw was another generic cop show. And this is why CBS is going to be having problems with this show, because this show is nothing like the original Magnum PI. It's just a desperate attempt to try to get viewers back to television, when they would be better suited by going out here and trying to launch something new and original, and trying to seek out new and original content from people who have new talent and new ideas. Because trying to recycle an old idea from the 1980s and make it new for 2018, that's just not going to work, because the people like myself who grew up with the original concepts look at that new concept and they don't see anything fresh and original from it. And the kids of today see nothing they can relate to, because Magnum P.I. was their father's show. And I would rather see a network like CBS go pick up something new, like an All About Nikki, or maybe an ISIS series or a John Haynes series, rather than go out here and rehash an old show like Magnum P.I. Because I believe these networks can do better, and if they stop scraping the bottom of the barrel and start reaching out to some of the new writers out here like myself, then maybe they could reach the next generation of viewers with some quality entertainment. If you'd like to try some of my SJS Direct publications, like the ISIS series, the E-Steam series, The Temptation of John Haynes, or the Spinsterella trilogy, you may do so by clicking the link to Amazon.com, and there you can pick up my stories in paperback and ebook. And if you want to help me make more videos like this, you can donate to my Patreon by clicking the link in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.